I used to think silence was peaceful. That was before I learned how loud it can become when it starts answering back. Mark and I lived in a house that looked complete from the outside. Trim lawn, white porch light, matching cars in the driveway, but inside. Sound died quickly. Our conversations were practical and brief, like notes left on a fridge. Did you pay the bill? I'll be late. Don't wait up. At night. He slept facing the wall, his breathing steady, unaware of how awake I was beside him. Sometimes I tested it, holding my breath to see if he'd notice. He never did. I worked nights at the jail, and part of me preferred it. The hum of fluorescent lights, the clang of distant doors, at least those noises acknowledged my existence. At home, hours slipped by without leaving marks. I would sit at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at my reflection in the dark window, half expecting it to move without me. I kept a notebook in a drawer, filled with unfinished sentences, things I once believed I'd turn into stories. Mark never asked about it. He never asked about much anymore. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the realization that I had already disappeared, and no one had filed a report. Block C wasn't loud the way movies pretend prisons are. It breathed instead, a low, constant hum that settled into your bones the longer you stood there. The first night I was assigned, the air smelled like disinfectant failing at its job, bleach layered over sweat, rust, and something faintly sour that never fully left. The doors didn't slam so much as close with intention. Metal meeting metal, like a decision being finalized. I learned quickly that Block C watched you back. Cameras blinked overhead, red lights pulsing slow and steady, like a shared heartbeat. The inmates knew my name before I knew theirs. Some stared too long. Some didn't look at me at all. Both felt wrong. Every footstep echoed, multiplied, returned to me distorted, as if the corridor was rehearsing my movements for later. Veteran deputies called it an easy block. Low drama, they said. Just don't get comfortable. I nodded, pretending I understood. But standing there with my keys heavy at my waist, I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear, recognition. Like I'd stepped into a place that already knew me and had been waiting patiently for me to arrive. I noticed him because he didn't do what the others did. When I walked past the cells, most inmates reacted on instinct, hands gripping bars, voices calling out, eyes sliding over me with hunger or hate. Dante Rodriguez stayed seated on his bunk, a book open in his hands, posture relaxed in a way that felt almost disrespectful to the place. He didn't look up right away. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made my skin prickle. When he finally raised his eyes, he didn't scan me. He focused. It felt deliberate, like he was choosing me from a lineup I didn't know I was standing in. His expression wasn't friendly or threatening. It was curious, as if he were studying something familiar he couldn't quite place. I held his gaze longer than policy allowed, unable to explain why breaking that rule felt less dangerous than looking away. "You walk like someone who listens," he said quietly, voice low enough to avoid attention. I should have written him up. I should have corrected him, reminded him of boundaries. Instead, I felt exposed, like he'd named something private I hadn't admitted to myself. I moved on, pulse sharp in my ears, but the feeling followed me down the corridor for the rest of the shift. I was aware of him without seeing him, certain that somewhere behind the steel and concrete, an inmate was still looking back. Quiet hour was supposed to erase noise, not create openings. The block dimmed, voices lowered, and even the jail seemed to lean inward, listening to itself. I walked the corridor slower then, keys muted in my grip, senses stretched thin. That was when Dante began speaking, not calling out, not testing me, just talking as if the bars were an inconvenience instead of a boundary. He asked about the book cart. I answered. He mentioned an author I recognized. I stopped without meaning to. We talked in fragments at first. Careful pieces passed back and forth. He spoke about reading to make time behave, about how pages could compress years into a single night. I told him I used to write, the words slipping out before I decided to trust him with them. He didn't smile. He listened. That felt worse. Listening carries weight. The minutes thinned. The cameras hummed. I knew exactly how far away the control desk was and how long I could stand there before it mattered. Dante shared a memory of college labs, the smell of antiseptic, the certainty of a future that once fit his hands. I told him about notebooks in drawers, dreams shelved, not discarded. When quiet hour ended, the silence felt altered, as if it had learned our names. The book cart became our excuse. I told myself it was harmless. Paper and ink. Nothing sharp enough to cut through steel. Dante requested novels most inmates ignored, stories dense with longing and time. When I handed them over, our fingers never touched, but the space between us felt charged, like a held breath. He talked about sentences the way some men talk about scars, tracing meaning where pain used to be. I recognized that language. It was the same one I'd abandoned years ago. We spoke about love in the time of cholera in low voices, dissecting devotion that survived rot and distance. Dante said love was a sickness people romanticized after they recovered. I said some illnesses never let you heal. They just teach you how to function while infected. The words stayed with me long after my shift ended, replaying in my head during the drive home, during dinner with Mark, during sleepless hours staring at the ceiling. Books started to feel less like stories and more like mirrors. Each one reflected a version of myself I had buried, restless, observant, starving. I began selecting titles for Dante before he asked, anticipating what might open him further. It scared me how natural it felt, how the pages seemed to absorb us both. Ink darkening like old blood, soaking deeper every time we read. Rules erode quietly. They don't shatter, they thin, like bone under constant pressure. The first one I broke didn't feel like a crime. It felt like mercy. I lingered too long at Dante's cell during count, long enough for the hallway to forget us. He lowered his voice, and I leaned closer, close enough to smell paper and soap on his hands. The bars were cold against my forearm. I didn't pull away. Well, he asked if I ever felt watched when I was alone. I said yes, surprised by the speed of my answer. He nodded, as if confirming a theory. When I handed back his book, our fingers brushed, an accident so small I could have denied it even to myself. Instead, I memorized it. The contact sent a sharp, electric clarity through me, like pain that proves you're still alive. I stepped back, heart racing, scanning for cameras, for footsteps, for consequences. Nothing happened. The jail kept breathing. Dante didn't smile. He just said thank you, carefully, as if acknowledging a gift that couldn't be returned. I walked away with my badge heavy and my hands shaking, aware of a new line drawn somewhere behind me. Not crossed. Not yet. But visible. For the rest of the night. Every rule sounded different, less like law and more like a suggestion I had already learned how to ignore. The idea arrived fully formed, which is how I knew it was dangerous. Phones were contraband for a reason. They turned walls into suggestions and silence into opportunity. I told myself I was only thinking it through, the way you test a loose tooth with your tongue. But soon I was mapping routines, noting who checked bags and who pretended to. I noticed how often evidence lockers were left unattended, how small objects disappeared into pockets without comment. The jail ran on habits. Habits could be bent. I didn't sleep the week I decided. I carried the weight of it in my chest, a dense pressure that made breathing feel deliberate. The phone itself was unremarkable, thin, black, forgettable. I wrapped it twice in plastic, then once more in denial. Walking through the Sally port, my pulse synced with the scanner's hum. Every step felt amplified, like the building was counting them. When I passed it to Dante, there was no ceremony. I slid it inside a hollowed book during quiet hour, eyes forward, voice neutral. He understood immediately. His fingers closed around the cover. Steady, grateful, silent. I walked away before the relief could turn into terror. Behind me, the jail didn't react. It never does at first. The first call came after midnight, the phone vibrating softly against my palm, like it was afraid to be heard. I sat up in bed, Mark asleep beside me, his back turned, his breathing unchanged. I answered without speaking. Dante's voice filled the space between my ear and my thoughts, low and careful, as if the darkness itself were listening. He didn't say my name at first. Neither did I. Names felt too real for what we were doing. We talked in fragments, pauses stretching longer than sentences. He described the way nights folded in on themselves inside the jail, how time lost its edges. I told him about the house, how it creaked and settled, how empty rooms amplify small sounds until they feel accusatory. Sometimes we said nothing at all, just breathed, proof that the line was still open, that the world hadn't intervened yet. I started structuring my nights around those calls. I went to bed early, claimed headaches, learned how to mute guilt. The glow of the screen became my only light, the voice my only witness. When the calls ended, silence rushed back in too quickly, leaving my chest tight and my ears ringing. I'd lie there afterward, staring into the dark, wondering when exactly midnight had stopped feeling like a boundary and started feeling like permission. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it easy to survive. My days began to feel like rehearsals for a life I only performed out of obligation. At work, I followed procedure, signed logs, spoke in the calm, neutral tone expected of me. At home, I nodded through conversations, answered questions a second too late, forgot details that used to matter. Mark noticed changes but misnamed them: stress, fatigue, the job. I let him. The truth would have required more attention than he was willing to give. My real life existed in stolen hours, in pauses, in the vibration of a phone hidden beneath my pillow. Dante knew the version of me that stayed awake, the one who admitted fear and hunger without shame. With him, I didn't have to pretend I was whole. That honesty began to poison everything else. I caught myself comparing silences, Mark's empty, Dante's deliberate. One felt like absence, the other felt like choice. I started compartmentalizing instinctively, like a trained response. Lies stacked neatly, each supporting the next. I told myself I could stop any time, that this wasn't erosion, just pressure. But some nights, standing in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back. She seemed divided down the center, each half pulling in opposite directions, both convinced they were the real one. I took the test before my shift, hands steady in a way that felt unnatural. The bathroom light flickered, casting my reflection in brief. Broken frames. I watched the strip on the counter like it was a verdict waiting to be read aloud. When the second line appeared, faint but undeniable, my first reaction wasn't fear. It was stillness. A quiet so complete it drowned out every other thought. I sat on the edge of the tub and counted my breaths. Pregnant. The word didn't fit my mouth. I tried saying it silently, then imagined explaining it to Mark, to a doctor, to myself. Each version sounded false. My mind began assembling timelines it didn't want to finish, measuring nights, distances, probabilities. None of the answers felt clean. At work, the jail felt closer, tighter, like the walls had shifted inward overnight. I moved through my shift on instinct alone, aware of my body in a new, unfamiliar way. Every step felt deliberate, every ache suspicious. The future had slipped into me quietly, without asking permission. By the time I drove home, the test strip was wrapped in tissue at the bottom of the trash, but the knowledge stayed sharp and present. Something had changed. Whatever came next. There was no returning to before. We didn't call it a decision. That would have implied choice, and neither of us felt like we had one. The conversation happened late. Voices low. Words arranged carefully to avoid breaking something fragile. Dante listened without interrupting as I told him. There was a pause afterward, long enough for fear to bloom. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost clinical. He said the child deserved a life untouched by bars and lies. I agreed too quickly. Relieved he hadn't asked for more. We framed it as responsibility, as restraint. Two adults doing the right thing, ending contact, ending whatever this was before it infected something innocent. Saying it out loud made it sound noble, almost clean. I told myself this was what love looked like when it chose to disappear. Dante said we'd stop the calls, stop the conversations, return to the shapes we were supposed to occupy. His words were careful, but I heard the strain beneath them, like metal bending slowly. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark, one hand pressed to my stomach, the other clenched around the phone. The silence felt punitive, immediate. I told myself it would get easier, that endings always hurt at first. But deep down, I understood what we'd really agreed to. Not an ending, just another loss I would carry quietly, without witnesses. The fight broke out without warning, the way storms do when the air has been wrong all day. Shouting ricocheted down the corridor, bodies colliding, the sharp ring of metal against bone. Training took over. I moved before thinking, reaching for a radio that suddenly felt too small. Someone slammed into me from the side, hard enough to steal the breath from my lungs. My back hit the railing. There was a flash of white, then heat, low and spreading. I remember sliding down the wall, the world narrowing to fragments, boots rushing past, orders being shouted, the smell of iron cutting through bleach. When I looked down, the floor was already stained, too much red, in the wrong place. For a moment, I couldn't connect it to myself. It felt abstract, like evidence in a case I wasn't assigned to. They told me later it was quick, that there was nothing anyone could have done. I nodded while lying in a hospital bed, staring at a ceiling tile with a hairline crack shaped like a river. The word miscarriage was delivered softly, as if volume could blunt meaning, when I was finally alone. The silence returned, heavier than before. Something had been taken without negotiation. The agreement no longer mattered. The future had ended on a cold floor, and the stain never really washed out. After the hospital, the jail no longer felt passive. I noticed everything. The cameras especially. Their dark lenses followed me with an attention I couldn't unfeel. Red indicators blinking like restrained warnings. I knew their angles by heart, had walked beneath them for years without a second thought. Now, each one felt intentional, as if it had been repositioned overnight. I caught myself slowing my steps, adjusting my posture, aware of how I must look from above. Grief sharpened my senses into something uncomfortable. Sounds carried farther. Doors closed harder. Even the walls seemed closer, breathing heat and dust. I imagined footage being reviewed somewhere. My face paused and enlarged, my expressions dissected for signs I didn't know I was giving off. Every routine interaction felt like a test I hadn't studied for. At night, I dreamed in fragments of red lights and narrow hallways that bent back on themselves. I woke with my heart racing, convinced I was late for something unnamed. The jail had always been a place you survived by understanding. Now it felt like a place that understood me instead. Watching, recording, waiting. Grief doesn't always make you fragile. Sometimes it sharpens you. After the loss, something inside me hardened into focus, a quiet, dangerous clarity. I returned to work with a discipline that impressed supervisors. I volunteered for extra shifts. I memorized schedules without meaning to. The jail rewarded consistency, and I became consistent in ways I hadn't been before. The ache in my chest needed somewhere to go. It settled into observation. I watched how deputies traded favors, how rules flexed depending on who was tired or bored. I noticed which cameras glitched at the same minute every hour, which doors lagged before locking. Patterns revealed themselves to me like confessions. I told myself this was just coping, keeping busy, staying sharp. Dante and I didn't speak. The silence between us felt charged, heavy with things we weren't allowed to say anymore. That absence fueled me. Every step I took through the corridors carried purpose, though I hadn't named it yet. Loss became leverage. The jail thought it had taken something from me and left me smaller. It was wrong. Grief was teaching me how the place worked and how it could be broken, piece by piece, from the inside. The decision didn't arrive as a thought. It surfaced as certainty. One night, standing alone in the corridor after count, I realized I had already crossed the point where hesitation lived. The jail hummed around me, familiar and indifferent, and for the first time it felt finite, knowable. I could see its seams now, the places where attention lapsed and trust filled the gap. The system relied on predictability. I had become predictable. That was the flaw. I didn't frame it as escape at first. I told myself I was correcting an imbalance, restoring something that had been taken without consent. Dante's cell was just another location on a map I'd memorized. Another locked space, pretending permanence. I imagined opening it the way you imagine stepping off a ledge, not with excitement, but with acceptance. Fear didn't stop me. It organized itself. I began thinking in timelines instead of consequences, in steps instead of morals. Every action felt justified by the weight already pressing on my chest. I had lost the future I was promised. The rules had failed to protect it. That night, I understood something clearly and without relief. If I stayed, I would disappear completely. If I acted, at least the loss would mean something. The decision settled in quietly, and I carried it with me like a second heartbeat. Once the decision existed, the jail changed shape. It stopped being a workplace and became a living system I needed to understand. I watched it the way you watch an animal you intend to approach carefully, noting when it slept and when it snapped awake. Shift changes were its breathing. Paperwork was its skin. I learned how long supervisors lingered in offices, how often radios crackled without response. Small delays accumulated into opportunities. I kept my notes in my head. Writing anything down felt reckless. Instead, I rehearsed routes during routine patrols, counting steps, timing doors. I noticed how trust functioned as lubricant, how familiarity made people careless. Deputies waved me through checkpoints without looking twice. I had earned that invisibility over years of obedience. At night, I replayed the jail's rhythms until they overrode everything else. The building no longer intimidated me. It felt heavy, slow, confident in its own permanence. That confidence would be its weakness. The more I understood the beast, the clearer it became that it wasn't invincible. It just assumed no one inside would ever dare to learn it this well. The medical wing was the soft underbelly of the jail. Protocol there depended on urgency, on people reacting instead of verifying. I learned which nurses trusted paperwork over faces, which doctors skimmed charts when the waiting room overflowed. Illness creates permission. It compresses time, lowers suspicion. I watched it work over and over. Patients moved, doors opened, questions postponed. When I forged the report, my hands were steady. Appendicitis was ordinary enough to pass without drama, serious enough to require immediate transfer. I mimicked language I'd seen 100 times, clinical and impersonal, reducing a human body to symptoms and codes. Dante never reacted when I told him. He listened, eyes unreadable, understanding what it meant without needing reassurance. Submitting the paperwork felt anticlimactic. A form slid into a stack, indistinguishable from the rest. That was the most unsettling part. How easy it was. No alarms, no hesitation. The system accepted the lie because it was dressed correctly. Walking away. I felt something close to awe. The jail hadn't resisted at all. It had simply believed me. And belief was enough to start the collapse. November 19th arrived without ceremony. No thunder, no warning signs. Just a gray morning that felt deliberately ordinary. I woke before my alarm, already alert, every movement practiced in my head so many times it no longer felt like choice. At the jail, the air was heavier, or maybe I was. I signed in, exchanged nods, followed routine so perfectly it became camouflage. The keys felt different in my hand. Same weight. New meaning. When I reached Dante's cell, my pulse slowed instead of spiking. That frightened me more than panic would have. I disabled the camera with a motion so smooth it felt borrowed, as if someone else had trained my body for this moment. The lock opened quietly, almost politely. Dante stepped out without a word. His face showed neither relief nor fear, only focus. We moved through corridors that had once defined his limits. Doors opened, checkpoints passed. No one looked twice. The system recognized me and let us through. Outside, the transport vehicle waited, engine ticking softly. As I drove away, the facility shrank in the mirror, solid and confident, unaware it had just been wounded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollowed out and precise. Whatever I had been before that morning was gone. Whatever came next had already begun. The first mile felt unreal, like a scene projected onto the windshield. The road stretched ahead, damp and colorless. Every sign and passing car strangely exaggerated. I kept my speed exact, hands steady at 10 and 2, forcing my breathing into something that looked normal. Dante sat beside me, silent, his presence dense and undeniable. The uniform I still wore itched against my skin, a reminder of a role I hadn't shed yet. We didn't speak until the facility disappeared completely, swallowed by distance and trees. Even then, words felt dangerous. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It hovered. Fragile, as if it might vanish if acknowledged too directly. Every mile marker passed like a test I expected to fail. I checked mirrors constantly, convinced sirens would bloom out of the quiet at any second. What surprised me most was the fear, not of being caught, but of how thin the line behind us already felt. The rules, the walls, the years of certainty collapsed faster than I'd imagined. 1 mile out, and the world had rewritten itself. There was no going back to before. The road kept unspooling, and with it, the understanding that freedom wasn't a destination. It was a condition we would have to survive. The first news alert came in Tennessee. A television bolted to the wall of a diner flickered, volume low, captions scrolling faster than anyone bothered to read. I caught my name before my face. Rebecca Lawson, Deputy Sheriff. A photo from my personnel file filled the screen, neutral expression. Hair pulled back, eyes trained to reveal nothing. Dante noticed my stillness before I spoke. He didn't look at the screen. He watched me instead. After that, they were everywhere. Gas stations, motel lobbies, phones held by strangers who didn't know they were studying our lives. Each image felt like a theft. My identity flattened and broadcast without context. The FBI seal followed us like a shadow. Most wanted. The words felt theatrical, unreal, until I saw Dante's face beside mine. Older and harsher than I remembered, rose in mid-blink, frozen. We changed routes obsessively. I memorized exits, avoided eye contact, learned how long I could stand still without attracting attention. Fame stripped us of invisibility. Every screen became a mirror that accused. At night, I dreamed in pixels, faces dissolving into static. The world had learned who we were faster than we could decide who we wanted to be. And there was no channel to change that. Disappearing turned out to be a craft. We learned it mile by mile, mistake by mistake. Hair was the easiest. Clippers buzzing in a motel bathroom. Dark curls falling into a sink, already stained by someone else's history. Clothes followed. Secondhand. Forgettable. We practiced new names in whispers, testing how they felt in our mouths, discarding the ones that sounded like lies. Everything that had once defined us became excess weight. I studied my reflection constantly, adjusting posture, pace, expression. The walk had to change. Confidence draws attention. Hesitation invites it. Dante learned to keep his eyes lowered, his shoulders rounded. We erased ourselves carefully, not all at once. Too much change attracts notice. Too little invites recognition. The balance was exhausting. Each version of us lasted only a few days. Then something would feel wrong. A glance held too long. A voice too familiar, and we'd shed that skin too. Sleep came in short bursts, filled with dreams of mirrors that wouldn't cooperate. By the time we crossed into Nevada, I understood something unsettling. We weren't hiding anymore. We were molting. And like anything in transition, we were most vulnerable precisely when we thought we were becoming new. We found the cabin by accident, or what passes for accident when you're running. It sat just far enough from the road to feel intentional, half hidden by pines that crowded close like they were keeping a secret. The rental agreement was thin, the questions minimal. Cash smoothed the rest, inside. The air smelled of dust and old wood, a place uninhabited long enough to forget expectations. For the first time since November 19th, we stopped moving. That alone felt dangerous. I learned the cabin's sounds quickly, the pop of the stove heating, the wind nudging loose boards, the floor complaining under careful steps. At night, darkness pressed against the windows, complete and unlit. There were no screens, no alerts, just quiet, heavy enough to make my ears ring. We cooked simple meals, slept in the same bed without urgency. The normalcy felt rehearsed, like a scene we were both afraid to improvise. During the day, I watched dust drift through slanted light and wondered how long borrowed peace could last. The cabin offered us a pause, not refuge. Still, we held it carefully. knowing even temporary stillness can feel like home when you've forgotten how to stop. Sleep didn't improve with freedom. It worsened. Without bars to define the edges, my dreams spilled everywhere. I woke nightly, heart racing, convinced I'd heard a door slam or keys rattle, only to find the cabin unchanged. Silent. Indifferent. The darkness outside the windows felt thicker than the dark inside a cell. Uncontained and watchful. I missed the predictability of confinement more than I was willing to admit. Dante slept lighter than I did. Sometimes he sat up abruptly, breath shallow, eyes scanning the room like he expected uniforms to materialize from the walls. We rarely talked about the dreams. Naming them felt like inviting them closer. Instead, we learned each other's tells, the way his jaw tightened before waking, the way my hand searched for something solid when panic crested. Daylight didn't erase the nights, it only made them feel delayed. I moved through the cabin with caution, listening for sounds that weren't there, replaying choices I couldn't undo. Freedom had removed the bars, but not the structure. Without it, fear stretched, shapeless and persistent. The cage had followed us, invisible now, carried entirely inside our heads. Hope arrived quietly, which made it harder to trust. It surfaced in small, almost careless moments. Shared coffee on the porch. Dante laughing at something ordinary. The way my shoulders relaxed without permission. Each instance felt like a breach, an opening I hadn't planned for. I kept waiting for the cost to reveal itself, for the world to notice we were getting comfortable. We spoke cautiously about the future, never using specifics. Words like someday, and maybe replaced destinations and plans. Anything concrete felt like tempting fate. I measured happiness the way you test ice, applying weight slowly, ready to pull back. The longer the days passed without interruption, the more dangerous that hope became. It suggested permanence where none was promised. At night, I lay awake beside Dante, listening to his breathing, imagining a life that didn't require constant erasure. The thought was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Hope asked for belief, and belief had betrayed me before. Still, it crept in, persistent and unwelcome, making me understand something cruel. Fear had kept us alive, but hope was the thing that could get us caught. It happened in a place too ordinary to feel dangerous. A grocery store with narrow aisles and soft music, the kind designed to blur time. I felt it before I saw him, the shift in the air, the subtle tightening at the base of my neck. Old instincts surfaced without permission. I straightened, adjusted my pace, reached automatically for a confidence I no longer owned. That was the mistake. I walked the way I always had, purposeful, measured. A gait built from years of training, from moving through controlled spaces where hesitation signaled weakness. I forgot, just for a moment, that I wasn't supposed to be that person anymore. I felt eyes on me and turned too late. He stood near the end of the aisle. Older, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. Not shopping, observing. Our eyes met briefly, and in that fraction of a second I knew. Recognition doesn't need confirmation. It settles immediately. Heavy and absolute. I broke eye contact first, heart pounding. Every step afterward suddenly too loud. By the time I reached the parking lot, the feeling hadn't faded. It deepened. Somewhere behind me. A stranger had remembered who I used to be, and I understood, with a cold clarity, that the past doesn't forget how you move through the world. The world closed in quickly after that. Too quickly. Sirens didn't wail at first. That would have been merciful. Instead, unmarked cars appeared at the edges of the street, parking too neatly. Doors opening with synchronized calm. Men and women stepped out wearing plain clothes and unmistakable intent. I counted them without meaning to. Old habits resurfaced, efficient and useless. Dante reached for my hand. His grip was steady, grounding. I scanned for exits even as I knew there were none. The grocery store doors slid open behind us, innocent and automatic, sealing the moment. Voices called out our names, not shouted, not pleading, instructive, professional. They gave us options that weren't really choices. Time slowed into something viscous, every sound sharpened, the click of a safety, the rustle of jackets, the whisper of wind across asphalt. I raised my hands first. It felt appropriate, familiar. Dante followed without hesitation. No one rushed us. There was no drama, no violence, just the quiet efficiency of a system correcting itself. As cuffs closed around my wrists, I felt an unexpected calm. Running had been exhausting. Being surrounded was final. The world had caught up, and for the first time in months, there was nowhere left to go. They separated us immediately, as if proximity itself were dangerous. I was questioned first, seated in a room too bright and too clean, hands cuffed to a table that reflected my own face back at me. They spoke in calm, practiced tones, outlining consequences, options, leverage. When I told them, I acted alone. It sounded rehearsed even to me. I insisted Dante knew nothing beyond what I allowed him to know. They didn't argue. They just waited. Later, I learned they made him the same offer. Reduced time. Cooperation. A narrative where love was weakness and blame could be transferred like property. Dante refused without hesitation. No conditions, no bargaining. He told them the truth as he saw it, that I chose, that he followed, that betrayal would erase the only thing prison hadn't managed to take from him. In court, I watched him from across the room, older now, thinner, but unmistakably intact. When asked to testify against me, he shook his head once. The sound of it echoed louder than any statement. That refusal cost him years. It cost me hope of leniency. But in that moment, surrounded by law and judgment, I understood something with painful clarity. Everything else had been taken from us already. Loyalty was the last thing we still owned, and he wasn't willing to sell it. Prison time doesn't pass. It accumulates. Days stack on top of each other until they lose individual weight. Becoming a single, grinding mass. My sentence was read aloud in a voice that treated years like numbers, not erosion. 15. Federal. I nodded, as if acknowledging instructions. Inside. Something closed quietly and for good. I learned the rhythms fast. Counts, meals, lights. The structure was familiar in a way that felt almost cruel. I had enforced this order once. Now it enforced me. I kept my head down, my record clean, my emotions rationed. Nights were the hardest, in the dark. Memory sharpened. I replayed choices not to undo them, but to keep them precise. Regret felt pointless. Accuracy did not. Letters became my only measure of time. Dante's handwriting changed slowly, tightening, then loosening again. Mine did the opposite. We wrote about nothing dangerous. Weather, books, fragments of thought, careful to avoid giving the past teeth. 12 years passed like this, not quickly, not slowly, just relentlessly. By the end, I no longer counted what I'd lost. I counted what remained. And that list, surprisingly, was not empty. The letters passed through many hands before they reached me. Gloved, inspected, stamped, delayed. Steele decided when love was allowed to arrive. I learned patience by necessity, not virtue. Dante wrote carefully, aware that every sentence might be read by someone who did not understand it. So we spoke in layers, books we both remembered, weather that mirrored mood, questions that sounded harmless but carried weight beneath them. I waited for the sound of mail like it was a signal flare. Some weeks, nothing came, and the absence felt heavier than bad news. When a letter did arrive, I read it once standing, once sitting, once lying down, as if changing posture might reveal something new. His handwriting grounded me. It was proof of continuity, of a mind still moving forward despite confinement. We never wrote about freedom directly. That felt dangerous, like tempting something that listened. Instead, we wrote about endurance, about learning how to exist in narrow spaces without shrinking. Over time, the steel between us became less absolute. The distance remained, but it no longer defined us. Ink bridged what bars could not, and in that fragile connection, we survived years that would have otherwise erased us completely. Freedom arrived without witnesses, no crowd, no speech, just a gate opening and closing behind me, with a sound I had waited years to hear. The air outside felt unscripted, too wide, like it didn't know what to do with me yet. I stood still for a moment, grounding myself in the weight of my own body, reminding myself I was allowed to be there. Dante was waiting 6 months later, older in ways that didn't need explanation. We didn't run toward each other. We walked, slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they're afraid of waking up. Sacramento was quiet enough to disappear into. We chose small routines, cheap coffee, long walks, no sudden movements. Freedom, we learned, wasn't loud or triumphant. It was fragile and required maintenance. We didn't talk about the years much. They existed like scar tissue, present, sensitive, no longer bleeding. What mattered was the absence of bars, of numbers, of constant surveillance. At night, we slept without listening for doors. That alone felt miraculous. 18 years had been taken from us. We didn't pretend otherwise. But what remained was ours. Finally and completely. We lived carefully, anonymously, and together, not chasing happiness, just keeping it, quietly.